Hey there, hope you're doing well today, and welcome to the spoiler review of the movie Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Just like the first film, this was written by J.K. Rowling and directed by David Yates. And I enjoyed the first Fantastic Beasts film. I thought that it was a flawed film, but it added some fun lore to a universe that I've been a massive fan of for many, many years at this point. However, it was very inconsequential and ultimately pretty forgettable. The characters weren't nearly as electric as the ones in the Harry Potter series, and the magic wasn't as cool or whimsical. Both of which were the real strong suits of the Harry Potter series that set it apart from other stories in the genre. Truly, if the first film wasn't a part of the Harry Potter series, we wouldn't be talking about it or any other sequels today. And here again, we have a movie that, were it not for the stories that came before, would not be getting nearly as much attention. However, it does come with context. And I did ultimately enjoy this film a bit more than I would have otherwise if it weren't in the Harry Potter series, but I'll get into context a bit later in the review. I could generally split the critiques of this film into three categories: one, the filmmaking problems; two, the fandom problems; and three, the cultural problems. There's a bit of overlap between them, but those are generally the problems that I've noticed people, including myself, having with this film. Let's start with the filmmaking problems. And what's interesting is I think that the base of this script is actually pretty good. I think that Newt's a really interesting protagonist. I really like the quotes: "You don't seek power, you simply ask whether something is right." And also, "You've never met a monster you couldn't love." Fantastic quotes that sum up a really unordinary character perfectly. And the fact that Newt is remembered throughout history even though he doesn't seek that power, and then later at the end, Grindelwald is telling Credence that he's going to be remembered, except we've literally never even heard of Credence before this. I thought that that was really cool. Queenie's turn was a good idea, I think, on paper, and to have a manipulator as a villain, I think, is pretty cool in this universe. And I think that having multiple characters who are conflicted in who they are and the world that they're living in, and showing that people who are struggling for answers are more attracted to certain topics because they offer simple answers, but in reality, those answers are not good for them. There's some really cool concepts in this film. The problem is the way that they're executed and they're put together in the script, and the fact that J.K. Rowling did this herself without the initial source material. And I've heard some people say this, but I was thinking this throughout the entire movie. I really want to read this. This film would have made a much better book than a movie, at least as the script exists now. There are a lot of scenes in this film that would have worked well during a book, but would have been cut out by someone who's more experienced as a screenwriter, or at least trimmed down or written more in a visual way. Some of the mysteries seemed pretty Potter-esque, like the foreshadowing of the unbreakable vow. Also, the mysteries of what Yusef Kama was doing, and the prophecy of the lost son and the despaired daughter. And side note, this prophecy pretty much proves that Grindelwald wasn't lying. Credence is definitely a Dumbledore, definitely a brother, and definitely not just Ariana's Obscurus passed on to him. That all seemed like the kind of mysteries that Rowling would do in her books when she was foreshadowing that Lupin was a werewolf, or when she was foreshadowing the locations of the Horcruxes. The problem is this is the only context we're going to have these stories in. We're not getting novels, and because of that, J.K. Rowling has a lot of stuff that she wants to put in, because we're not going to have any other way of knowing these things otherwise. I believe her when she says that she knew Nagini was a person, because just a few months after the last book came out is when she dropped the bombshell that Dumbledore was gay. So she's obviously hid stuff from us in the past because she thought it wouldn't work with the original stories. And I totally get people wanting to have like actual representation, and that it looks a bit like JK is being fake woke by having these characters in her novels but not having to deal with the repercussions of those things or having to write those things. I get that, believe me. But I also get that JK has a lot of ideas about her characters, and to her, a fan theory can be more than just a fan theory. It can be someone misunderstanding her intentions with something. But now we're seeing the kind of encyclopedic storytelling that comes with putting every detail about every character in a small space. Yes, I believe that she knew that Nagini was a person, but it doesn't fit well with this story. And on top of that, it makes it seem super convenient that this character that we know just so happened to also be the love interest of a major character in this other story. Also, something I've noticed is that people who are complaining about Nagini being in this movie are a lot of the same people who are complaining that JK shouldn't reveal these things on Twitter, but should just create another story. But all these things being in the same movie makes the pacing off. It makes the editing really shoddy. A lot of scenes just start in new locations in lazy ways. We just have characters arriving in new locations, new characters giving their backstories, plot happening, and then leaving those locations. Here are a bunch of random convenient things. Jacob's memories coming back, making the most emotional part of the last film completely meaningless. The Niffler getting past the age/belief/intention fire line to get Grindelwald's necklace without anyone noticing it. The connection between Newt and Credence, who just so happened to meet in the last film circumstantially, but also so happens to be connected by Newt's ex-girlfriend Leda, who switched Credence as a baby, who also happens to be a Dumbledore. The engagement announcement was printed wrong? What the fuck? I mean, to show that Grindelwald's evil, they literally just have him do a bunch of obvious evil things, like dropping a lizard off of a flying carriage or giving the orders to kill a child. That's really lazy and unnecessary. There's just too much stuff to go through, and that makes it so that you don't have enough time to flesh out any of the things that actually might just work on their own. And a lot of these things would have been trimmed down by someone who's actually good at writing scripts for films, but J.K. Rowling is really good at writing details. She needed more room for all of this. She needed more room to show why Credence was at the circus now, or why Newt was banned from traveling if that literally wasn't going to show up anywhere else in the film. Or to show why Queenie switched to Grindelwald's side, or the Lestrange flashback. Or just to spend time with these characters so that you can feel more emotionally attached to them when big things happen later on in the story. The details are some of the greatest things about JK's books, but in this context, that strength is turned into a weakness. However, and this is a big however, I was personally able to look past all those issues and look at this more of like a Silmarillion in a movie form. So the filmmaking problems, yeah, they're there. They're definitely there. They're always going to be there and prevent this film from ever being seen as great or even good, probably. However, they weren't a deal breaker for me personally. Whether something is explained in a lazy way, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have a strong reaction to it because I already have such a strong connection to this universe. I'm going to at least be interested whether or not I have as strong of a reaction I did as when Sirius died. I'm going to be interested in what's happening whether or not I have as strong of an emotional reaction, just like in the Silmarillion. Nothing in that is emotional. It's literally like reading a textbook of a land that doesn't exist. But I enjoyed it because I like the world. Like I said, the base of the story is pretty good in my opinion. And that's what I'm looking at when I look at my enjoyment of the film. I can get over the fact that I'll never be emotionally invested in Queenie switching over to Grindelwald's side because I know that Grindelwald is a master manipulator. And they show that Grindelwald needs Queenie so that they can control Credence using her power to read emotion. If they had hammered that in a little bit more, the motivation of Grindelwald to have Queenie on his side, I would have found it more believable and compelling. And I will never care about Leta Lestrange dying in this film or how she dies. I just never will. However, I think that thematically it's strong, and I can enjoy that I now know a bit more about this universe. I'm also willing to give a pass to some of these things so long as they're fixed within the next films. I'd be more willing to accept Nagini in this set of movies if she is justified later on in the story. And I think that she will be. Just the fact that she didn't join Grindelwald at the end shows that she has agency and she's a more complex character than they showed in this film. I see that a lot of this is just setup, and setup in a movie like this is just really lazy, but I'm willing to accept that so long as the next film is an actual film with stakes and emotions and such. Just because it is a part of a larger universe that I am so biased towards. And I don't think that's a bad thing so long as I'm able to admit that I am biased towards it, because I definitely am. I did mind the fandom problems and the cultural problems a little bit more, though. I already mentioned Nagini in this film making the whole universe seem really small, but then there are other things in this film, such as McGonagall being in it, even though she didn't need to be, and she wasn't even born at this moment. And the book Fantastic Beasts was referenced in this movie, so like, has Newt published that yet? Why didn't we see anything about that? That's how we know these characters. And there's some things in this film that are minor contradictions to what happened in other films previous. Like the fact that you can't use another potion to stop a love potion. Or the fact that you can't apparate on school grounds. Dumbledore teaches transfiguration, not defense against the dark arts. Some of the visuals for well-known things were also a bit different than they were in the previous movies. Like the portkey and the smoke to apparate that they for some reason brought back from the fifth movie. Also, the Unbreakable Vow now creates a physical object that you can destroy, which makes it not unbreakable anymore. Thanks, I hate it. And the magic doesn't feel nearly as grounded anymore. There used to be like very tactile and distinct rules for spells. But now it just seems like the magic is, well, magic. It can do anything that you pretty much need it to do in any moment, Deus Ex Machina style, unless they need a character to be in a corner. While these may not be huge problems, they are definite proof that J.K. Rowling doesn't know everything, either that or David Yates doesn't care about continuity. He just wants to make things whoosh in fun ways instead of letting the actual story create the drama. Ultimately harmless, but still not a deal breaker for me. And then there's the cultural problems, which, like, yeah, it's getting harder to see JK as a champion of any kind of marginalized group. It's pretty bad that the second ever Asian female character in this franchise turns out to be a slave of Wizard Hitler, and that the only major black woman of this franchise is a product of rape, or that a Jewish woman gets tricked into following other Wizard Hitler, or that Johnny Depp is even in this movie at all in a role that absolutely anyone could have played. There's just really no way of getting over that for me. And now 3 girls have a crush on Newt? No? Another thing that I think that JK probably needs some work on is writing multiple narratives. In Harry Potter, the books and the movies, you see basically everything from the perspective of the main characters. You don't have to jump back and forth between narratives, but with this much more open world, and with characters not being in the same general place, you have to jump around a lot more and get to know these new characters from the perspective of other characters that you don't know very well. I think that Roland is just much better with constraints and a structure too. I think it's also significant to notice that each book was always a year long and it built off of the characters of the previous ones that you already had attachments to. Now that we have all these new characters, most of which we haven't met before, she's writing them with the same complexity that she would have written some other characters that we've known for all of our lives. So when we see Lita's background where she kills her brother and then later died, it feels way less impactful, because she's only referenced in 1 or 2 lines in the previous film and seen through a photograph. And then we're supposed to care about her, whereas we actually would have cared if it was someone like Neville Longbottom, someone that we knew from the very beginning. And I know, I'm aware that this film is going to go down as the worst in the entire Harry Potter franchise, so long as they're able to get their act together for the next ones. And as a film, yeah, this is definitely the worst, but I would still rather watch this one than Harry Potter 5. I feel like this film had some cool, interesting things and some good ideas, and Harry Potter 5 to me was just bland, boring, and going through the motions. I'll always take interesting over safe. And I also get that I'm very biased when it comes to this film because of the context of my fandom, but this movie doesn't exist in a vacuum, so when you hear my score at the end, know that it's more a reflection of my own personal feelings towards it than the general quality. I'm not here to give you a number for the objective quality of a film. That's just not really possible in my opinion. I'm not giving the film a pass for all the problems that it has, but as someone who's a fan of the series, I'm more in the demographic of the people who can look past the problems. I feel like I keep yo-yoing back and forth between I love it and I hate it, but like this movie gave me some complex emotions. Nothing is in black and white. And though I think that JK is making the biggest mistakes here, I think that David Yates is also getting a little too big for his position. With this, I'm referencing like the ending fight scene with the blue and orange dragon fighting each other for entirely too long, with no real reason other than spectacle, let's be honest. Or how confusing the opening scene was with Grindelwald's escape. I'm still not sure if there's a definitive answer as to when he escaped and why he might have gone back for his confidant. I don't really know. And the scenes in the ministry where the camera is super close to the faces of the characters, like there's really no reason for that. It might have been to show how off Newt was feeling at that moment because he was seeing Lita again after so long, but like it just didn't work. Also, he's just way too reliant on CGI when I think that practical effects really work well with this franchise. But things like that make me think, alright, David Yates has directed 5 of these things. One of the greatest things about the previous movies was that we would get a bunch of different directors to give their own take on the franchise. Maybe it's time to bring someone else in to direct one of these things. Maybe it's time to get someone who can question JK a little bit more. Is this a trash movie? Yeah, kinda. Is JK taking over a little bit too much control? Yeah. Is JK a bad screenwriter? Yeah, at the moment. But is she a bad writer, though? No. No, I wouldn't say that. Is she bad at making stories? I'd say no. Is this a good story? I'd say yeah. However, and I know that this comparison has already been made to death, but the Star Wars prequels actually had some pretty good ideas in them too. Despite being terrible films, George Lucas had a really interesting story to tell about how the Nazis came to power, and I can enjoy the description of the Star Wars prequels more than I can enjoy the actual movies. Just like this movie is an interesting story about how Nazis were created that's better in description than in execution. That's why this movie is worrying to me. It's ultimately not a deal breaker, but if they can't get their act together for the next movie, then I'm probably not gonna like the rest of the franchise as much. I'd probably give this thing a 6, but other than that, hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in another video.